I like talking numbers. I like talking data. So we're about to talk marriage rates, living arrangements, and adults still living with their parents. So in 1967, this big blue line, 70% of adults 18 and over were married and living with another spouse. Fast forward to 2023, just 50% of adults 18 and over were living with a spouse. Now, if you look at the green column with the different levels of green, in 1967, it was about 8% of adults who were living alone. Fast forward to 2023, this looks like about 13% of adults living alone. The little bit lighter green are children of the householder, so an adult living with a parent. And you see how big that number is, and that number looks to be about unchanged. Now we start to get with the lighter green. The lighter green is like all others, and the darker green is unmarried partners living together. So you'll see how each of these numbers have changed, and the dynamics of adulthood and culture, people opting out of marriage, all of that can be seen with these living arrangements. Now look at this number. This graph is also from the census. The top number is the number of 18 to 24-year-olds. The green is men, the purple is women. And if you'll look, there are much more young men still living with their parents as opposed to the women. And it looks like young men have always, since they've been tracking this, lived more with their parents than women have. And then you look down the second graph, still, these are men and women aged 25 to 34. Way more men are living with their parents than women of that prime age. What does that tell y'all? The mom to wife pipeline is drying up. These men are still living with their parents. Well, more men than women are still living with their parents. And what does that say? It's like the failure to launch. Unmarried women living with their parents is one thing. These men that are forever living in their parents' house is a whole nother thing. But you guys can weigh in on that. That's obviously an opinion. The data speaks for themselves. More men, young men, are still living with their parents than the women. So you guys can form your interpretation of that data point. Now to this article in Psychology Today. The record-setting rise of single living in the US. The number of adults who have not married and never have been married is remarkable. Over the past half century or so, the U.S. has transformed from a very married nation to a place in which married people are teetering on the edge of becoming a minority. Whether we look at the number or percentage who are not married, or the number who have never been married, or the number who are living alone, the trends are remarkable and sometimes record setting. If you are an adult in the US and you are not married, are you in the minority? According to the most recent Census Bureau statistics on marital status, it is married people, not unmarried, who are in the minority. They account for 49% of the people 15 and older. The other 51%, 136.3 million people, are divorced, widowed, or separated, or they have always been single and never married. I prefer marital status statistics that start counting at the age of 18 instead of 15. Over the past few years, though, the Census Bureau no longer shows those numbers in its key table. When those data were available, the trend was flipped, with just over half of adults 18 and older who were married and just under half who were not married. Either way, being single, unmarried in the US today is totally ordinary. Of all those adults 15 and older who are not married, 2/3 of them have never been married. All right, percentage of all unmarried in the US who are widowed is 11%, divorced 19%, separated 3%, always single is 67%. It says, are you around 30 and never been married? If you are around the age of 30 and have never been married, you share status with about half of the people your age. For men in 2023, the median age at which they were first married was about 30. That means that about half of men who were marrying for the first time were 30 or older. Women were a little younger, with their median age when they first married was around 28. So if you have ever been married, how old were you when you got married? I was 33 when I got married, so I definitely helped push that age range up. These numbers are particularly remarkable when compared to the year at which people in the US married at the earliest age. In records dating back to 1890, that year was 1956. Women were just 20 when they first married. That means that about half of them were teenagers. Men were a little older at 22 and a half. On average, today's young adults have an additional 8 years of unmarried life than their peers from 1956. And of course, that's only for those who do marry. Those who will never marry have a whole lifetime of being single. Think how different the experience of young adulthood is likely to be for those who were already married in their early 20s compared to those who are unmarried as they approach 30. This is one of the reasons why it is so important that you start making sure that your kids, as kids, know how to cook, clean, and take care of themselves, because many of them might not get married. And so they need to have all of these survival skills, these adulting skills. Are you around 40 and never been married? In the US today, it's not unusual to be around 40 and never been married. In the most recent data from 2023, more than a quarter of adults between the ages of 35 and 44 had never been married at 26%. For men, that percentage was even higher at 29%. For women, it was lower at 22%. If you live alone, you share that experience with more than 38 million other adults in the US. In this Census Bureau table AD-3, living arrangements for 2023, numbers are for people 18 and older. That's a record number. As a percentage of all people 18 and older, it is a shade lower than it was the year before at 14.8 compared to 14.9 in 2022. That is this chart that we just talked about. Another way to think about how common it is to live alone is to consider different kinds of households. If you live alone, do you think your household is unusual? Not like those households comprised of married couples and their children. Think of it this way. If you were to wander around the US knocking on doors at random, how often would you find one person living there? And how often would you find a nuclear family, married parents and their kids? In the 1970s, you would find more than twice as likely to, I'm sorry, you would be more than twice as likely to find a nuclear family household than households comprised of one person. 40% of all households were comprised of married couples with children, and 17% were people living alone. Now that's flipped. In 2023, there were far more households comprised of one person living alone, 30%, and married couples living with kids at 18%. Unmarried in America. A 2003 Business Week ran a cover of the story Unmarried America. In the following 20 years, the number and percentage of unmarried Americans has continued to grow. Nonetheless, the US is still a very marriage-oriented society with laws, policies, language, and norms very much reflective of the desires and perspectives of people who are married. After all, no one asked married people, when are you going to get single, or why are you still married? The thing is, these numbers are shifting away from marriage being a given, children being a given. People are able to do what they want now that women have rights and freedoms and can have their own money. Women are opting out if they want to. And no, not everybody has to adhere to those traditional roles. So it looks like things are shifting because of these freedoms on everybody's accounts. But I don't think that perceptions have caught up with reality of where we are in the US. I would like to know your opinion on this with the changing of demographics, the changing of how people are living, the marriage perception. Some people want to get married, some people don't. I want to hear from you. Jump in the comments. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.